Okay, good evening. This is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and yes, that's right, folks. We're back. We're back with the Truth Attack. Okay, so we are the Liberty Works Radio Network, and we do need the support of the members of the listening audience to keep the broadcast network operating and the shows coming. So if you enjoy the information, the topics, the lectures, the discussions, the revelations, the guests and hosts on the other shows of the network, we sure would appreciate it if you could find your way over to the Liberty Works Radio Network.com website. Get signed up as a monthly subscribing member. Even if it's as little as $10, $20 a month, every membership helps, and we do need the support of the listening audience to keep the network operating. And of course, if you want to get fully informed on why the income tax laws are about to fall, and I do mean fall, you need to find a way over to taxfreedom.com and start reading. Get educated, read about the broken tax system, which has been broken, completely constitutionally broken, since they passed the new income tax law for a fact, and in actuality, it's been broken since World War II, when they started taxing the labor of the American people directly and without limitation and without constitutional authority to do so. They got away with it with the victory tax and then just kept the same withholding system going without any tax imposed, because the victory tax expired after 2 years in 1944. So it's all been a system of deceit and fraud by allowed withholding, which creates the appearance of subjectivity and a presumption of subjectivity to tax. And of course, once they've taken the money, the only way to get a refund is to file a 1040. And somehow, when you put the numbers on a 1040, you never end up with a refund, because there's the underlying presumption that it's a direct tax that reaches everything you do in the 50 states, which is a constitutional fraud. And we're going to talk more about that in a bit. But first, let's talk about what's happening on the domestic scene. And of course, there's both good news and the normal news that you get from the Democrats. The good news, of course, is that Donald Trump's economic policies, despite the naysayers and prophecies of disaster, destruction, and inflation from the Tariffs Act, inflation came in at 0.1 for the month, 2.4 year over year. It is basically gone. The 2.4 is where we were at when Trump left office and Biden took over and drove it to 8% within 9 months by energy policy, or within a year. And of course, Donald Trump's new energy policies, going back to drill, baby, drill, has brought the price of oil down to $67 a barrel and still dropping. Now, that $67 a barrel is a big reason why inflation has gone away. Energy is a cost component in everything that happens, and it's a major cost component in all the major consumables like food and products, because everything travels that last 50-mile leg by diesel truck. You drive the price of diesel to $7 a gallon like Biden did with his disastrous energy policies, and that's pretty much going to guarantee inflation. And of course, it ran wild during Biden's term. Nothing he could do, or nothing he even tried to do. He just sat there and said, oh, everything's fine. So, bringing the price of oil down from $90 a barrel to under 70, headed for 60 hopefully, has relieved the pressure. And of course, the consequences are gold is at 3,400 and silver is at 36, which are all-time highs. And whether they'll pull back or keep running is a question, because there's a lot of cash out there still chasing hard assets, because they know the money ain't worth jack. They're printing it into oblivion. As goes the currency, so goes the fate of the nation, and the quality of life of its people will deteriorate with the currency's decline. And I think everybody knows that's true because that's what we have experienced for the last 4 years under Joe Biden. A harder and harder task to make ends meet and make your monthly nut to stay above water, with rent, transportation, food, utilities, all the costs going through the roof. It's harder and harder for average men to make ends meet on a monthly salary that doesn't keep up. So, inflation, 2.4%. It's time for the Federal Reserve to lower the interest rates. Donald Trump is exactly right again. I mean, these folks over at the Federal Reserve Bank are just absolutely criminal. They politicized the rates before the election by dropping them a full interest point while inflation was still running rampant. And that obviously was a ploy to try and help Joe Biden get reelected. Now, why the Federal Reserve wanted a moron, senile, incompetent idiot running the country, you tell me. Is it because they know they're actually the ones running things, and as long as there's an idiot in the president's office, a senile, incompetent fool who doesn't know what he signs or what he says or where he is, the bank can run the country pretty much any way it wants to, can't they? As the government's not capable of interfering if the president isn't capable of talking. And that's why we've had inflation and a system for the wealthy for the last 4 years, as those with access to the capital, the 16 trillion in M1 money supply they printed during COVID and gave to the institutions, not the people. So Trump has brought it under control. 6 months in office, 2.4%. Inflation is gone. The price of gas is down. And I would anticipate that we'll see some price reductions across the board in the supermarkets because they're getting rid of the fuel surcharge, which is no longer there for the food. And those prices should come back down with the price of energy going down. Now, of course, inflation never gives back everything it takes. It only gives back a portion of it. So we're going to be looking at higher food prices for a while. They just won't be as so much higher as they have been for the last 4 years. And again, you can thank Donald Trump directly for that. Relief on the food prices, relief on the gas prices, everything. Release on the oil price, the inflation down to 2.4%, and people, Main Street has a positive economic outlook on things. The institutions are still wondering about what's going on, but it looks like Donald Trump's tariff ploy has worked. And I'm not sure half the country understands that he never intended to use the tariffs to raise money. He is not going to replace the income tax with tariffs. That was not his plan. It was never his intention. He used the putting of tariffs in place to force the other nations that have tariffed American goods in their country. He's used the tariffs to force them to come to the table to negotiate getting rid of the tariffs in both countries. He can't tell these foreign countries to drop their tariff on American goods and then turn around and impose a tariff on their goods in America. He imposed the tariff to force them to come to the table so that both countries will agree to drop or eliminate the tariffs entirely. And that way, America goes back to not having the tariff that he put in place temporarily to force the negotiations, but American companies get the opportunity to sell into the foreign market when their punishing tariff is eliminated. American wine and goods are locked out of Europe. American dairy is locked out of Canada. American rice is locked out of Japan. We are locked out of markets all over the country because our products are cheaper and better for the most part. And if they're allowed into the foreign country, it will wipe out their local industry because they can't compete with American productivity. But locking us out means everybody in that country has to pay more for food. So the government is operating against the interests of the population and for the interest of a very small minority of producers that have bought the government. in these foreign countries and are using laws to lock out American products to protect their profits, which are taken from the population, which is forced to pay a higher price than it should in a free trade system. So Trump never intended to use tariffs to replace the income tax. They're going to have to find something else because the income tax is gone. It is going down. Everything the IRS and the DOJ does today is unconstitutional, and we're going to review all of that in just a minute. So, in addition to the economic news being good, we've got the Democrats back at the same game they've been playing. They're in denial about the chaos, the violence, the arson, the anarchy, and the assaults that are happening and spreading to more countries from the liberal, loony left, protesting the removal of criminal illegal aliens from the United States after Biden let in, what, a million or so out of the 12 million he let in, figure 10%, 1.2 million were actual criminals. That's a lot of criminals in America. And Biden did it. And the Democrats are fine with it. They're arguing to keep the criminals here. I mean, how insane. They wanted high oil prices, so everyone pays more. They didn't mind the crime and the anarchy and the arsons from either the Black Lives Matter riots or the anti-ICE riots now. Their party is disintegrating. It's now led by Bernie Sanders and AOC. It's become the Socialist Party. The Democrat, the just middle left party, is gone. It's the far left liberal loony progressive party. And the fact that they're fighting to keep criminals here and oil high and crime and looting and shoplifting, it's all back again. It's all back again. The liberal loony left uses every excuse it can to go steal as much as it can from the businesses in the Democrat cities that aren't using the police and other resources to maintain order. This is all the fault of the Democrat governors and mayors allowing the violence in their city and supporting it while denying they're burning and looting and assaulting officers. It's absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. I mean, we can see the video on the TV from a number of cities. The Democrat comes out and, oh no, this is peaceful. There's no violence here. This is just like the Black Lives Matter, where they're standing there claiming there's no violence while a fire rages in the background, burning down City Hall or the church or whatever it was they were burning down that day. So, Democrats are in denial again. They're out on the warpath. And when they burn things down and chaos, oh, that's a peaceful protest. But when conservatives walk through the Capitol on January 6th and stay between the rope lines and are ushered by the police officers who let them into the Capitol, that's insurrection. Oh, I see. Carrying Mexican flags, assaulting officers, looting, arson. That's not insurrection. That's a peaceful protest. Does anybody else understand how insane the Democratic Party has become? This is absolutely insane. Burn down everything and we'll start over. Excuse me, you don't have a job. What are you going to start over at? Burning down the forests? Burning down the homes? Turning off the water so that the homes will burn down? I mean, how insane are the liberal left's policies? Every single bit of their policy is anti-human and pro what? Pro what? It's not pro-environment. They burned that down because there was no water. They pretend to be pro-environment or pro-whatever in order to assume more power. That's all the Democrats care about, their own power to rule you because they don't want to represent. Okay, I think I hear the first commercial break coming up. This is Thomas Fried on the Liberty Works Radio Network, Truth Attack Hour. We'll be back in 5. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network, and let's just get right back into this. As I've been teaching for the last 6 months, the income tax system is about to die. And of course, everyone's yelling and screaming on Capitol Hill about how they have to pass the big, beautiful bill with all the spending in it and a restoration or making permanent the Trump tax cuts that occurred in 2018 under the new tax law. And this is really the key to understanding why the income tax system is going to end. It's a combination of both the new tax law and the Supreme Court's holdings in Moore, which they haven't applied yet to a domestic tax case. But we're going to look at that in just a minute because I've been talking about Moore for a while and I want to review what the court said. But first, let's do a short review of what the IRS, the DOJ, and the lower courts have been doing since 1955. In 1955, in Glenshaw Glass, Commissioner v. Glenshaw Glass, the Supreme Court ruled that Section 61 was enacted by Congress in order to tax all accessions to wealth. And from this point forward, the income tax has been interpreted, applied, and enforced by the IRS progressively, more aggressively each decade, as a direct tax under the 16th Amendment without subjectivity to any constitutional limitation, making it a non-apportioned direct tax. Now, this is all over the IRS's frivolous arguments publications that the DOJ passes out and uses in court. And it is a list of court cases from the various circuit courts where each circuit has said the income tax is a non-apportioned direct tax under the 16th Amendment without limitation. And of course, that's fraud. But that's what they've said. In the Ninth Circuit, they used an N.R.E. Beckcraft. In the Eighth Circuit, they used Broughton and Young. In the Tenth Circuit, they're using Collins. In the Sixth Circuit, they're using Perkins. Every circuit has its own case that it cites to where it declares that what the Supreme Court said in Brushaber was it's a non-apportioned direct tax. Of course, that's not what they said in Brushaber. And none of these cases actually cite to any text in the Brushaber decision. They just proclaim that's what the Supreme Court did. Now, it's my opinion that if you want to know what the Supreme Court did, you don't go read a circuit court decision that says he said, she said, but doesn't actually cite anything that was said. If you want to know what the Supreme Court said, you don't go to a circuit court, you go to the Supreme Court case, Brushaber versus Union Pacific, where it very clearly lays out a rejection of the direct taxation argument. They reject that argument and uphold the tax as a function of indirect taxation under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. So since 1955, the federal government is operating unconstitutionally an income tax system that imposes, effectively, the second plank of the Communist Manifesto instead of constitutional taxation. And of course, under the Communist Manifesto, the state controls the means of production, and labor is one of them. So they want to tax you directly to control your labor and keep you enslaved so that they can rule you. And they've done that, haven't you? Because it's no longer possible for you to make a living with one earnings. Both the husband and the wife have to leave the home to work in order to survive because of their theft of half of the man's salary. So with both parents out of the home, the children are thrown into the state schools to be wards of the state and indoctrinated with socialist propaganda, liberal nonsense. Which is what we're seeing on the streets, isn't it? All the liberals' kids who have been wards of the state since they were 5 have been indoctrinated with propaganda that has turned them into useful idiots. Useful idiots! Half of Congress is nothing but a useful idiot, serving the Federal Reserve Bank and compelling the American people to do said same. So for 50 years, 45 in written precedents that are easy to find, They've been arguing and enforcing the federal personal income tax on the American people as a non-apportioned direct tax under the 16th Amendment without limitation that applies to everything you earn because it's all been redefined as gross income under Section 61. And Section 61 becomes the basis for the application and enforcement of the tax as a direct tax because it applies to all those earnings. And they ignore the fact that the original income tax legislation was a tariff act, imposing a tax collected from foreigners, and that the original legislation for Section 61 was a Canadian tax treaty. Section 61 has never had domestic application in America to make you rent, interest, dividends, salary, wages, compensation, alimony, tips, etc., etc., etc. Never had any domestic application. It was never on a statute to tax all accessions to wealth of all Americans in the 50 states. That is such liberal communistic nonsense coming from the same Supreme Court that gave us Korematsu. Let's lock up all the Japanese. That gave us Roe v. Wade. Oh, you have a right to an abortion. It's right there in the Constitution. That gave us Chevron, unleashing the bureaucratic state's ability to rule by writing its own law, which is exactly what they did with the income tax, because there's no statutory liability for a direct tax that exists in the law. They had to make that up under Chevron and regulatory deference that let the IRS write a regulation for Section 1 tax imposed that went far beyond what the statute provides. The statute provides for a rate of tax. How are you liable for a rate of tax? You're only liable for tax that you collected or that has been assessed on a return. That's the only way liability is created. If you collected it from someone else, you're liable for turning over what you collected to the Treasury. And when you make an assessment on a Form 1040, you're liable for the bottom line. So there is no statutory liability, and that's why they want you to voluntarily file. So what did they do to create liability for the direct tax imposed on all sources under Section 61 as authorized allegedly under the 16th Amendment? They made up a regulation, 1.1-1, 26 CFR. That's Part 1, Chapter 1, Section 1, which is where the tax is imposed, a rate of tax. And the regulation says you're liable for the tax. But the statute doesn't say that. And it's not a direct tax. But they had to make up that liability in the regulation in order to make it appear that there is a direct tax that you're liable for. But their regulatory liability falls under Loper-Bright. The courts can no longer use agency regulation to replace statute when the statute does not provide for what the regulation tries to do. Regulations implement the statutes. They don't expand them, and they can't be used to make the force of law greater than it is under the statute. And under the statutes, there's a rate of tax imposed. It's collected from foreigners, and then the collector, the withholding agent, is liable for the tax he's collected. And that's what the Supreme Court said existed in 1916 in the Bruchaber decision. On page 21, they're reviewing the big picture of the legislation they're testing, and they plainly say the act provides for collecting the tax at the source. That is, makes it the duty of the corporations, etc., to retain and pay the sum of the tax. Just like your employer withholds money as tax and then sends it in, so too was the original income tax enacted as a tax collected at the source. The corporations, etc., with the duty to retain and pay the sum of the tax are the withholding agents defined in law at 7701A16. And the liability that they have for the tax they've collected is specified in 1461, and the parties that the withholding agent is authorized and required to withhold tax from are specified in 1441, 1442, 1443, and every single one of the persons subject to the collection of the tax at the source is foreign. Non-resident aliens, foreign corporations, and foreign tax-exempt organizations. That's where the original tax applied. That's who it was collected from. It's not a direct tax. It's collected at the source. So, since 1955, they've reversed everything and been enforcing the second plank of the Communist Manifesto, not constitutional taxation. Now, in 2018, Congress wrote a new tax law, and this means everything has to start over when there's a new law. If anything changes, you have to do a review de novo, out of the new. You can't just invoke an old decision and say, oh, see, we've done it all before. No, no. You have to look at what the new law says. How is it different? Is it different? And in this case, as I said, they've been enforcing the tax as a direct tax under the 16th Amendment without limitation. Well, they passed the new tax law in January of 2018, and before the House could vote on it, they had to pass and write into the congressional record the constitutional authority for the bill they were enacting, altering the income tax. So the question is, what did Congress write in the constitutional authority statement for the new income tax law enacted in January of 2018? Did they write the 16th Amendment, which is what they've been doing for 60 years? Is that what they wrote? No, that's not what they wrote. What they wrote was the constitutional authority for the bill was Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. Taxation by impost, duty, and excise, none of which reach the labor of the American people. Impost taxes foreign activity, and the original legislation was a tariff act that collected the tax from foreign persons. Duties tax exported goods, and as you know, we have duty-free shops. We don't have any duties in the country. We have some countries you're not allowed to sell to, but we don't have duties, taxes on our exported goods. We encourage our manufacturers to successfully sell into foreign markets. We don't punish them with taxes for doing so. We don't have any natural resource or material goods shortages in this country where we need to keep everything here. So we reward our manufacturers. Imposts don't tax domestic activity. Duties are taxes on exported goods, which obviously cannot apply to labor. And excise is the power to tax the manufacture, consumption, and sale of commodities within the country, things like alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. Excises are taxes on licenses to pursue certain occupations, like selling alcohol, tobacco, or firearms. And excises are a tax on the corporate privilege, where everything the corporation earns is subject to federal taxation because it's earned under an enjoyed privilege, that of incorporation. So everything the corporate person makes is subject to tax. But the individual citizen doesn't earn money by any federally or state-granted privilege. They earn money by right, by human right, by right from God to work and keep and accumulate the fruits of labor. Otherwise, you won't survive the cold winter. So impost, duty, and excise don't tax American labor. And it's not a tax under the 16th Amendment. And being under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, it's not direct, it's indirect, because that's where indirect taxation is defined, because you have the shifting of the burden from the collector to the pocket of the person from whom it was collected. And the taxpayer, the collector, never pays a dime out of his own pocket. He only turns over what he's collected from other persons. So the new tax law and the congressional authority statement directly, constitutionally contradicts what you have been told by the IRS, the DOJ, and the federal courts for 60 years. Why? Because they've been lying to you. Lying to you. Lying to you about everything. It's not direct. It's not unlimited. It's not under the 16th Amendment. It's not a non-apportioned tax. These are all lies. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and let's just get right back into it. When the commercial break came up, I was telling you that the government has been lying to you about everything. It was never a direct tax. It was never under the 16th Amendment. It was never unlimited, and it was never a tax without apportionment. That's the second plank of the Communist Manifesto, which reads, a heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax. That's where you find graduated taxation. Divide the people and keep them at war with one another, so that the classes will constantly be calling out to the government to assume even more power to end the class warfare it engineered with the unconstitutional, different, graduated, different laws, different rates of tax for the different classes of American citizens. And it's totally unconstitutional, and the principle of geographical uniformity falls apart when you realize that means you could write, Congress could write different laws for the Jews, the Christians, and the Islams, different laws for the gays and the straight, different laws for the men and women, different laws for the young and old, different laws for the Italian, the Irish, the Mexican. You could write different laws for all of them, and it would all be perfectly fine as long as each class and group of person that you discriminated against was treated the same in every single state in the country. And as long as you have geographical uniformity, as long as you're discriminated against all the Jews in every state, it's perfectly okay. As long as you're discriminated against all the Mexicans in all the states, it's perfectly okay. Baloney. It's a lie. Geographical uniformity applies to commodities, articles of commerce, and the corporate person and the foreign person. Parties whom Congress, parties and things that Congress has the power to discriminate against. But Congress has no power or authority to discriminate against the American people on any basis, none of those mentioned, nor wealth or income. It's unconstitutional. So what did the Supreme Court say a year ago when this came up? Well, let's look and read a little bit here. I'm reading from Moore now. We must decide whether the 2017 Mandatory Repatriation Tax, or MRT, exceeds Congress's constitutional authority. To analyze that question, we begin with a brief review of Congress's taxing power under the Constitution. After independence in 1776 and under the Articles of Confederation in effect from 1781 to 1789, the federal government relied primarily on contributions from the states for revenue. The federal government's expenses and needs sometimes far outpaced the contributions that the states were willing or able to provide. As George Washington famously recognized during the Revolutionary War, reliance on the states to fund the national government hampered important national priorities, including the war against the British. And they cite 12 papers of George Washington Revolutionary War series in the letter from Valley Forge. The national government's continuing revenue problems under the Articles of Confederation helped prompt the Constitutional Convention that convened in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. The Federalist, number 30, A. Hamilton. The framers responded to the revenue problem by granting Congress an expansive taxing power. Now, this is where you want to pay attention. Article 1 of the Constitution affords Congress broad power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. That power includes two great classes of taxes, direct taxes and indirect taxes, citing Brushaber v. Union Pacific in 1916. Generally speaking, direct taxes are those taxes imposed on persons or property. See National Federation of Independent Business v. Sebelius. That's the first healthcare case. As a practical matter, however, Congress has rarely enacted direct taxes because the Constitution requires that direct taxes be apportioned among the states. Oh, that's funny. I thought the 16th Amendment authorized a non-apportioned direct tax. Here it says the Constitution requires direct taxes be apportioned among the states. Which is it? To be apportioned, direct taxes must be imposed in proportion to the census. U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4. See also Section 2, Clause 3. In other words, direct taxes must be apportioned among the states according to each state's population. That's all you need to read to know they've been unconstitutionally enforcing the income tax under the 16th Amendment as a direct tax without limitation. Everything they wrote in a frivolous position is a fraud. It's not a non-apportioned, all direct tax, not a non-apportioned direct tax. All direct taxes have to be apportioned. It goes on. So if Congress imposed a property tax on every American homeowner, the citizens of a state with 5% of the population would pay 5% of the total property tax, even if the value of their combined property added up to only 3% of the total value of homes in the United States. To pay 5%, the tax rate on the citizens of that state would need to be substantially higher than the tax rate in a neighboring state with the same population but more valuable homes. To state the obvious, that kind of complicated and politically unpalatable result has made direct taxes difficult to enact. Just not hard to enforce for 70 years. Indeed, the parties have cited no apportioned direct taxes in the current Internal Revenue Code, and it appears that Congress has not enacted an apportioned tax, i.e. a direct tax, since the Civil War. See 12 Stat 297, E. Jensen, The Taxing Power, a reference guide to the United States Constitution, 89, 2005. By contrast, indirect taxes are the familiar federal taxes imposed on activities or transactions. Okay, indirect taxes are the familiar federal taxes imposed on activities or transactions like ATF or import-export. That category of taxes includes duties, imposts, and excise taxes, as well as income taxes. U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, Amendment 16. The 16th Amendment makes the income tax an indirect tax, not a non-apportioned direct tax, like they've been lying to you for 75 years. It's a fraud, a complete and total constitutional fraud. Under the Constitution, indirect taxes must be uniform throughout the United States. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. A tax is uniform when it operates with the same force and effect in every place where the subject of it is found. United States v. Kwiatkowski. That's the geographical uniformity I was referencing that they've used to allow communistically graduated tax rates to divide America, steal from the rich, and subsidize the poor with unconstitutional welfare programs. It has the government passing out money to the uneducated to keep them on welfare and voting for the welfare party, and to buy the votes of the elderly and insecure. Okay, so let's see what the court says here. Because income taxes are indirect taxes, income taxes are indirect taxes. They are permitted under Article 1 without apportionment, because they only have to be uniform, not apportioned. But it's not direct. It has to have basis in impost, foreign, duty, export, excise, corporate, or commodities. Labor isn't touched by any of those forms. As the court has said, Article 1, Section 8's grant of taxing power is exhaustive. Well, not quite. Meaning that it could never reasonably be questioned from the founding that it included the power to lay and collect income taxes. Yeah, as a function of indirect taxation by impost, duty, and excise, not as its own source to tax everything an American does. That's fraud. Constitutional fraud. Never reasonably be questioned from the founding that it included the power to lay and collect income taxes. Citing per shaver as an indirect tax again. In 1861, Congress enacted In 1861, Congress enacted the nation's first unapportioned income tax, 12 Stat 309. The Civil War income tax was recognized as an indirect tax under the head of excises, duties, and imposts, citing Brushaber, also Springer v. United States. In 1895, however, in Pollock v. Farmers Loan and Trust, this court held that a tax on income from property equated to a tax on the property itself, and thus was a direct tax that had to be apportioned among the states. That's citing Pollock v. Farmers Loan and Trust. The Pollock decision sparked significant confusion and controversy throughout the United States. Congress and the states responded to Pollock by approving a new constitutional amendment ratified in 1913. The 16th Amendment rejected Pollock's conflation of income from property and the property itself. The amendment provides that Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states and without regard to any census or enumeration. U.S. Constitution Amendment 16. Therefore, the 16th Amendment expressly confirmed what had been the understanding of the Constitution before Pollock. Taxes on income, including taxes on income from property, are indirect taxes that need not be apportioned. Meanwhile, property taxes remain direct taxes that must be apportioned. See Helvering v. Independent Life. Okay, so there you have it. Supreme Court tells you it's not a direct tax. It's not a non-apportioned tax because any direct tax has to be apportioned to the states. They tell you income taxes are indirect, and it's not a new power. That makes income not the subject of the tax, or the subject of taxation, nor the object of the tax. Income is the yardstick that measures the amount of tax that is owed on the earnings or profits that are derived from the privilege enjoyed. If there's no taxable privilege, if there's no foreign activity, if there's no import or export, there's no tax that reaches the labor of the American people as a direct tax that you must self-assess upon yourself. It's unconstitutional, and there is no tax imposed on your earnings. It doesn't exist. Section 61 was Canadian tax treaty. The original income tax, what's taxed is listed in 1441B. It's all the items of earnings listed in Section 61, but in 1441B, it's those earnings when they're earned by a non-resident alien individual, not a citizen. Any taxation of your labor and fruits of labor derived from the rights of work would be a direct tax, and that's why they had to lie to you about the 16th Amendment. Because in order to do that, they had to have the authority to tax directly, because they've admitted impost, duty, and excise don't tax labor. Impost and duty obviously can't tax the labor of the American people, because impost taxes foreign persons, foreign activity, foreign imports, and in foreign places like territories, possessions, and in a foreign country under a tax treaty. Labor can't be taxed by imposts because citizens are not foreign. Duty taxes exported goods. That doesn't tax labor. Excise taxes commodities, licenses, and corporations. And it doesn't tax licenses like electrical, carpenter, or plumber. It taxes only licenses for commodities, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. There is no tax that reaches labor. The only way to tax the labor would be to argue, tax labor by excise, indirectly, would be to argue that labor is a commodity and therefore subject to taxation, as that's what excise tax does, is it taxes commodities. But the labor unions saw them coming in 1935 when they had passed the first Social Security Act. The labor unions said, oh my God, they're going to try and tax our labor. They went to Congress and had them pass Title 15, Section 17, which says the labor of a human being is not a commodity or article of commerce. And by that law, your labor is removed from subjectivity to federal taxation. You can't be taxed by impost, duty, or excise. That's why they've had to lie to you and tell you it was a direct tax under the 16th Amendment. I got it. So, this is Thomas Freed. Read it all on taxfreedom.com. We'll be back next week with more. That's just a little bit. I was about to wrap it up. I knew we were coming up on it. Thank you much. You too. Bye bye.